The story of yeast begins in ancient times, long before scientists understood what yeast actually was. Around 4,000 years ago, in ancient Egypt, bakers accidentally discovered the magical power of yeast when dough was left out and began to rise. What they didn't know then was that they were observing a natural fermentation process driven by wild yeast, tiny fungi that exist in the air, on grains, and on the skin of fruits. As bakers noticed this, they began to harness this natural process, using yeast to make bread lighter, airier, and more delicious. Early Egyptians understood that yeast was crucial to leavening their bread, but they didn't have the scientific knowledge to explain it. The Greeks and Romans continued to refine the art of bread making, and by the 1st century BCE, the Romans were producing leavened bread on a larger scale. But it wasn't until the Middle Ages that yeast truly began to make its mark on history, as people used sourdough starters, which contain naturally occurring yeasts, to make bread rise. Fast forward to the 17th century, when the scientific community started to make strides in understanding fermentation. It wasn't until the late 1600s that a Dutch scientist named Antonie van Leeuwenhoek first observed yeast under a microscope. He was the first person to see the tiny organisms and realize that they played a role in fermentation. However, it would be centuries before yeast's true nature was understood. In the early 1800s, French scientist Louis Pasteur made groundbreaking discoveries. Pasteur showed that fermentation was caused by living organisms, yeast in particular, and that it wasn't a mystical or supernatural process, but rather a biological one. Pasteur's work laid the foundation for modern microbiology and revolutionized our understanding of yeast. He proved that yeast is a living organism that ferments sugars into alcohol and carbon dioxide, which is why it causes dough to rise. This discovery was not only important for bread making, but also for brewing and winemaking. In the early 20th century, the mass production of yeast became a reality. With the advent of industrialization, companies began to cultivate yeast in large quantities, isolating strains that were most efficient for baking. This led to the rise of commercial baker's yeast, which could be used to leaven bread on an industrial scale, making bread production faster and more reliable. Today, yeast is cultivated in controlled environments, grown in sugar-rich molasses or other nutrient sources, and then dried or compressed into cakes or granules for easy use. The most common yeast used in baking is Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is efficient and predictable, ensuring consistent results for both home bakers and large-scale producers. Thanks to our understanding of yeast, baking has become an exact science. Modern bakers can control the fermentation process, creating everything from soft, fluffy white bread to tangy, flavorful sourdough. Yeast is also a key player in brewing, producing alcohol in beer and wine, and even in some medicines, where yeast cells are used in the production of vaccines and other biotechnological applications. But even with all our scientific knowledge, yeast remains a mysterious and powerful organism. Despite our mastery over it, the tiny, invisible fungi still holds an air of magic every time it makes dough rise or transforms sugar into alcohol. From ancient Egypt to modern laboratories, yeast has been one of the most important discoveries in human history. Its humble role in fermentation continues to shape not only our food, but our world. The next time you bite into a piece of bread or sip a glass of beer, you can thank yeast for its vital contribution to human culture and science. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating stories from history. Until next time, keep exploring.